Salutations to the nations. What's good? Angel Nazi, it's your boy Young Sinai.
Angel Nazi.
All right, so this video is by RGT85, and it is, are retro games really better than modern games? It's a common debate. Let's hear his opinion on it. Let's see what we got to say. What I got to say. Y'all let me know what y'all think in the comments.
Are retro video games truly better than modern video games? This is a debate that wages war online on places like Twitter and various forms of social media, and it's a very nuanced topic. And if you know anything about me, you would know I loved nuanced topics, especially topics that I can see both sides of the coin on. There are people that love the retro games, there are people that love the modern games. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I consider myself to be a bit of a modern vintage gamer, if you will. I've been playing video games for 35 plus
Modern vintage. That's an interesting term.
years. That's probably longer than some of you people watching this video have been alive on Earth. I enjoy the modern games. I enjoy the vintage and retro games. But unlike the Man Modern Vintage Gamers YouTube channel,
Whoa, he has hair and a head under his hat. That's crazy. I don't know if I ever seen his head before. Yo, that's wild, yo. I mean, I know I wear a hat a lot too, but yo, that just blew my mind more than anything he's gonna say in this entire video. That's crazy.
I actually have hair. Sorry, pal.
Wow.
But I find this topic to be very interesting, and since it's interesting, I'm going to talk about it. I'm interested to hear what you guys have to think about this topic as well, and I kind of want to provide points as to why retro is better than modern and why modern is better than retro. Now, the first thing on the side of retro being better was something that I feel like you have to have been there to sort of understand it. So if you're a younger gamer, I don't think you'll ever truly understand the gravity surrounding this situation, but it has to do with the consoles themselves. Console life cycles were nothing like we see today. Consoles usually had about 4 or 5 years in the sun, but after about 2 years of the console's initial release, you started hearing about the next thing already. You see, technology moves very fast in the modern era, but as far as video game consoles are concerned, it moved a hell of a lot faster back then than it does now. Look at the generation.
Did it really? I don't remember. I don't remember at all. I don't remember that aspect of it moving fast, but okay, I'll take his word for it because I don't remember.
Leaps you had with so many systems. It's absolutely insane. And then you look at some.
Yeah, the generational leaps. Okay, if that's where he's going, yeah. I don't think we'll ever see anything quite like that again. From it to go from, I remember all in my childhood playing Atari. Atari 2600 didn't come out like when I was a kid, but my dad had one. So I remember going from Atari and Sega Master System and NES to Super NES to N64 and PlayStation to PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3. I remember all those things, and there were enormous leaps in the graphics. Enormous, where you know you go from something being a drawing to something being 3-dimensional. You know, I can't. He's right. Can't really explain it.
Something like the PS4 to the PS5, and yeah, the devil's in the details, but you gotta look really at.
It's kind of like how smartphones are when you think about it. It's like, you know, going from a car phone being literally in the car, right? Literally in the car, in the armrest, to, okay, now I can carry this brick of a phone around, to, you know, a smaller brick, and then, you know, flip phones, Blackberries. You get my point, where now where phones are at, the technology is so good, now it's just like very minor upgrades. Like a iPhone 16 Pro Max is really no different than a 15, a 14, a 13, a 12. It's just these small incremental changes. You have to do something drastic to distinguish yourself, like having a phone that folds or something like that nowadays. So I get what he's saying on that point. Let's continue.
At the details of these sorts of things, you can easily assume that a PS4 game is a PS5 game and
Yep.
vice versa. Are you
I'll be honest with you. That's why I haven't even upgraded to a PS5. I am happy and content with a PS4 until like I'm given a good reason. Like I don't know why I would get a PS5. Like let me know in the comments why I should get a PS5. It'd be really hard to convince me though, because I'm such a portable gamer at heart. But like I don't know. You know, please let me know. Because I want a PS5. I really want one.
really doing that with the older consoles? I mean, look at something like the Super Nintendo to the Nintendo 64 and take a look at Super Mario World to Super Mario 64. Now, Super Mario World was obviously a game for the Super Nintendo that could not be on the NES because of the graphics, because of the sound, because of the size of the game. Now, compare Super Mario World to Super Mario 64 in terms of size, scope, graphics. What's different here? Super Mario 64 feels like such a massive game, especially compared to Super Mario World. You had bigger and better things like bigger graphics and polygons, no sprite-based stuff. There was never an instance where you looked at a N64 game and been like, oh, this could have easily been done on the Super Nintendo.
You know, other game was dope and had that same effect, but people always hate on this game for some reason, was Donkey Kong 64. That was a good game in my opinion. And like if you look at that compared to Donkey Kong Country, you know, it's a huge shift. Donkey Kong Country is still a better game.
Or vice versa. You never could confuse a Super Nintendo game for a Nintendo 64 game. Technology moves so fast then because this was all sort of uncharted territory. Video game companies didn't really have these sort of tools at their disposal until the industry started to grow. And as the industry started to grow and more money came into it, then you had the opportunity to really utilize this technology and make these generational leaps. Give consumers a reason to want to upgrade their systems. Look at PS1 to PS2. The difference is night and day. Sega Saturn to Sega Dreamcast. And really, I feel like this was a thing right up until the PlayStation 4 era, because we started to get to the era of diminishing returns. Then
That's
the
what-
devil became more so in the details. Things like frame rate, different sorts of lighting and physics engines, all great things, but they don't have that same sort of wow factor that we had with the previous consoles. And if you were there during that time frame, it was an absolutely magical experience.
Yeah.
Think of how much video games grew from 1990 to 1999. It's absolutely insane. And think about how video games have grown in the past 10 years in comparison. And it's like, you know, it's
Right.
nowhere near the same. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's
That's big facts. But you know something? Those Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, even NES graphics hold up so well because they're just art that's like pixelated art form, and that aged very well. Whereas if you look at something like PS1, even N64, you're comparing it to 3D graphics from like the 90s to 3D graphics from 2025 and stuff. You know what I mean? It did not age as well.
people sort of harken back to. Then, of course, you have to look at the software itself, because retro game software was kind of like, you know, it was uncharted territory. Once again, I hate to use that term once again, but I feel like it's very applicable here, because we weren't just taking
You can see that dude all through the door.
genres once again, but I feel like
I see you, boy. I see you right there, man. You ain't hiding.
it's very applicable here, because we weren't just taking genres and then trying to polish them to a new standard.
Oh
This
my,
was the actual era of the
look so bad
creation
back there.
of genres. You did not have a template to follow. You did not have previous games to sort of look back on and be like, oh, well, we could do something like this that this game did previously. No, 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 no. Because of the advancements of technology, companies were constantly trying to redefine what video games were. The jump from 2D to 3D, from a 2D platformer to a 3D platformer, a 2D action adventure game to a 3D action adventure game. The innovation was just absolutely off the.
You know what game I've never played, and y'all are gonna cook me in the comments. Y'all go cook me because it's a classic. I've never played. Well, so that's what you say is a classic. I've never played
Constantly trying to redefine.
Banjo-Kazooie. Is that crazy? Is that wild? Yo, roast me in the comments. Let me know. Should I play Banjo-Kazooie like today? Will I enjoy it?
What video games were. The jump from 2D to 3D, from a 2D platformer to a 3D platformer, a 2D action adventure game to a 3D action adventure game. The innovation was just absolutely off the charts because there was nothing to really sort of copy. You didn't have a blueprint for what type of game you should make. You were kind of the creator of the blueprint itself. And yes, there are instances where some games did better things for the genre than other games, and copycats eventually did come along. But it was an era for creativity, a level of creativity that we definitely do not see nowadays as far as mainstream gaming is concerned. We'll talk a little bit more about that as the video goes on, but companies could take risks during that era. You sell a game, you sell 100,000, 200,000 copies, you're probably very happy. You didn't have to make bukus of money in order for a game to be successful because the development costs of these games was definitely a lot lower. And because of that, you had more risk taking, you had more creativity, you had more outside of the box thinking. And sometimes,
Yo, that Earthworm Jim game they just showed, that's a prime example of what I mean by the 3D artwork did not hold up the same as the pixelated. If you go back and look at my video games that got turned into TV shows, yeah, a little shameless plug right there. Lucky, please go ahead and put the card up there. But if you look at how Earthworm Jim looks on the Sega versus how it looks right here, it looked way better on the Sega Genesis.
Of these games was definitely a lot lower. And because of that, you had more risk taking, you had more creativity, you had more outside of the box thinking. And sometimes, in a lot of instances, these games ended up being very successful. Think of how many sequels you saw for games on various platforms. Sometimes you'd see 2, 3, maybe even 4 different sequels all on one platform. If the game was successful enough and people showed an interest of it, and of course you could do more with that game as far as expanding upon it, companies were really willing to do things like that. You also have the fact, kind of going back to the hardware, that a launch day game and an end day game for a system was usually almost like the size of a generational leap. Like, as far as details were concerned, as far as what sort of,
because they had like figured the system out.
Horsepower you could get out of the hardware that you had, it was crazy. Look at a game like Tekken 1 to Tekken 3. Like, just look at that. That looks like a huge, massive leap in.
I'll hold you. Them both kind of look the same. He could have found a better example, but yeah, it is true though.
Terms of what they were able to do. Compare early PS1 games to late PS1 games. Compare early Super Nintendo games to late Super Nintendo games. It was just a completely different sort of time frame. And I feel like because of that, there was a lot of special things with that. And companies realized that they could take a bit more of a creative risk. You know, they could have a game that maybe didn't meet their expectations and then still survive. Whereas nowadays, it's very more cutthroat. You know, 5 million, 6 million copies, sometimes that's considered a failure, a flop, because these budgets have gotten so overinflated with these games.
Man,
now, why is that? Because
games nowadays look insane. That look, yo, them graphics look crazy. Almost got whiplash. Looking at them old PS1 graphics to this. Man,
because the industry,
I want to run that back. Just look how crazy that changes all of a sudden.
grew so a failure, a flop. And 6 million copies, sometimes that's considered
to
the
this.
industry grew substantially as far as, you know, players and player types and, you know, companies, how big they are and stuff like that. You got to remember, like, it might sound kind of messed up to say, but the 90s for video games, and
You know what I want to see a re-release of? Like a remaster is Metal Gear Solid, the first one. Yo, that would they didn't make that, did they? I'm almost certain they did not make that. Am I tripping? Is there a Metal Gear Solid 1 remaster? Yeah, no, there is no official Metal Gear Solid remaster. What made me say that is because Metal Gear Solid was the first game that I ever played that made me feel like, oh my gosh, I am in a movie. I am literally playing a movie. And then when I just saw that Guardians of the Galaxy, I'm like, yo, games really look like movies now. They absolutely need to do a remaster of the first and the second Metal Gear Solid. What are they thinking?
really by extension, the
That would, man, I just gave them $1 million idea.
early 2000s, it was kind of a bit of a boys club. You know, companies marketed their stuff towards teenage boys. It was, video games were seen as kind of like, you know, oh, you play a lot of video games? Oh, that's kind of weird. Like, it wasn't culturally acceptable. It was accepted among the boys. Like, all you and your boys, y'all played video games. But like the girls and stuff, they didn't want to mess with a gamer, dude. Parents,
Yeah, what were they doing? Well, if you're a girl or if you're a woman watching this channel, what were you guys doing while we were playing video games? I had never, ever, ever thought about that.
older people, you know, they didn't care about video games. It didn't have that sort of massive appeal. So because of that, I feel like as video games have gotten bigger,
Or were you all playing video games? Were you all like having sleepovers, girl sleepovers, playing like Mario Party?
and more things have kind of emerged from it, more people are now trying to get involved into it, as far as companies going about it in a bit of a predatory way. And that's really the only way I can say it, because when you look at the amount of predatory practices that a lot of these companies are doing nowadays, like, yes, a lot of these companies have opened up video games to everyone. There's a type of video game for every single person out there.
That's what I always tell my wife. I say, yo, I literally say the exact same thing. I say, there is a type of video game for every single person alive. I literally saw a game that recently came out. It's like a cozy game where I don't know what it's called, but you run a laundromat for panda bears.
As these companies get bigger and as they hire more people and as they want to take this medium to other different places, you start to get your books all out of order. You start to need to make more money on your games. And then you start to kind of, oh, well, maybe we should just replay the classics and stuff like that. You know, video games take a hell of a lot longer to make today because of how advanced they are than they did back in the day. Some people might actually like that. Some people, maybe not so much. Now, as far as what I was talking about earlier with the creativity, there is a segment of modern gaming that still does focus on the creativity portion of things. And
yeah, it's called indie games.
That is indie games. And I think indie
I promise I have not watched this, but it's facts.
Games have kind of become like this whole new subsect of gaming, to where that's where you have to go to get your creativity. You watch a game award show or something like that, 90% of these games look interchangeable. There's little differences here and there in terms of story and character design, but 90% of these games look interchangeable. The indie games are really the ones that are still kind of pushing the genre because they don't have the big overhead. They don't have to pay thousands and thousands of employees, and they don't need to sell millions and millions of copies to be considered a success. And I think that indie games are a great part of the video game industry, but it's kind of a double-edged sword, and I want to talk about why. Because with modern gaming, the gates are open. Anyone can really make a game now. And you could be on a Nintendo system, you could be on PlayStation, you could be on Xbox, you could be on Steam.
It ain't that easy to make a game. Not anybody can make it. I know he's being hyperbolic, but I'm just saying because I'm trying to get into game development and learning how to develop games, even on so-called just like drag and drop, is still a learning curve.
There's no any sort of, for lack of a better
Let me know in the comments if you develop games, and if you do, what game engine do you use?
term, any sort of quality control. Now, that's not to say indie games are bad, because there's tons of great indie games, but there's tons of slop. And there's tons of companies that are realizing that they could put slop, reflipped assets out on these places like the eShop and Xbox and, PSN, and there's no recourse for it. There's no sort of slap on the wrist. There's no sort of, hey, what the hell are you doing? Say what you will about Nintendo. They limited people back on the NES to how many games they could release to kind of perceive, having a higher standard of quality comparative to Atari. But companies found a way around that, such as Konami making Ultra games in order to skirt around that and release more of their properties onto the NES. But maybe gatekeeping wasn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. And I almost speak from an independent standpoint on that as well. Because if you look at the amount of independent games that come out on a weekly basis, it's absolutely insane. How are you supposed to gain any sort of traction? How are you supposed to find a market when the market is so oversaturated and so flooded with so many releases? Now, yes, it is a consumer's market at the end of the day, but if the consumer doesn't even know you exist, like, what do you do? It's a very interesting sort of thing, but not to hark on negatives about modern gaming, because there is a lot of positives besides anyone being able to create a game, which can be a good thing or can be a negative thing.
After he gets done telling his takes, I'm gonna say my takes on the positives and negatives of modern versus retro. If he doesn't tackle them all,
Depending on how you look at it, digital distribution is another double-edged sword, where I feel like it does have its benefits because of the fact that the aforementioned indies don't have to worry about putting a game out in a store or something like that, and then thus raising cost of the development of the game. And you get instant access to games. You can get a game whenever it pops up into your head. I don't want to go to the store. I don't have a store near me. Oh, I can just download this game right here and, play it on my system. It's a good thing, but once again, we get into the predatory side of things where companies are clearly taking advantage of this. There's no reason for a modern game to release as a digital and a physical version, and the digital version is the same price as the physical version. There is no
yeah, that's ridiculous, man. That's just greed. That makes no sense at all.
physical counterparts for the digital version of the game. You don't have to make a case and cover art.
That's like if the record labels were charging the same for like a vinyl as they would like if it's in Apple Music.
And have a physical media such as a disc or a cartridge inside of it. I feel like a lot of people just have gotten kind of jaded with a lot of modern gaming, because as any sort of industry grows, as anything grows in general, the bigger it gets, the more people that don't really have the hobby or whatever the situation is has like the best interests in minds. They view it from a more business perspective. They want to take advantage of that. And that's why you see things like DLC and microtransactions and all of those sorts of things. So I feel like a lot of people have soured on modern games. You're not really seeing any innovation. You're seeing previous games, previous ideas that we've already seen before just get, done for a modern audience, as far as not that sort of modern audience, but like, a new era of a gamer, as in someone who maybe isn't familiar with the older stuff. Now, there are benefits to modern gaming. The graphics look great. The controls are better. You play a 3D platformer now from the modern era versus the 3D platformer from the N64 era, you're probably getting a better controlled experience. You can now control the camera, and there's definitely benefits to both sides of things, but I don't know. It's an interesting topic, and I just wanted to kind of provide some points on both sides of the fence because, like I said, there is no right or wrong answer to this. It's a very nuanced topic. And I feel like if you're not kind of older, you might not get it. You might not understand it. But if you are older and you were around for these these massive leaps in generations, like it just feels a little bit different. It feels a little bit different than it did back in the day. Now you're seeing the lack of competition between companies, whereas back in the 90s, companies were at each other's throats all the time. Once again, creating innovation, creating.
It made me think if you were a hip hop head and you'd be keeping up with this whole Kendrick Lamar Drake thing, it made me think about when Kendrick said on Euphoria, it's only 2 ghosts left, and I see what he say. He says 2 ghosts left, and I see 2 of them kissing and hugging on stage. When he was talking about Drake and J. Cole, like how they're all buddy. That's like how the companies are now.
A power race, but also a control race, coming up with different controllers and stuff like that. New characters.
My bad. He says 3 goats left. My fault.
New mascots, new ideas, new IPs. And it's just very different now. I'm not saying it's worse now, but it's different. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments section down.
I'm going to let you know what I think right now. Okay, so he didn't touch on some of the points that I thought he was going to. But the main point that I want to stress that makes things different now is back then, when you bought a game, you bought the entire game, right? You didn't have to wait for all these patches and updates and all of this stuff. If he said this, my bad, I didn't hear him. But the day that you bought the game, you got 100% of a complete game. I feel like that is one of the key main points between gaming then and gaming now. Also, something that is a positive with gaming now is playing online, depending on how far we're going back. If we're going, back to Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, when I was dead broke, couldn't picture this. All right. That's definitely a positive now. I mean, it can be very toxic, but just the technology aspect. What else? Positives and negatives. I think one huge positive back then is it had a lot more couch co-op games, right? Nintendo's pretty much holding it down on that side of things. But I think the main thing that sucks now is you get a game in a broken state. Also, when you're buying these games online, you're not even buying them for real. You're leasing them. So that's huge. Back then, when you bought a game, you owned the game. And you could take that game and you could break it in half. You could sell it. You could trade it. So I think those are some of the main things as well. But I think overall, good video. He hit on some good points. All right, yeah, that's what's up. Yo, so I appreciate everybody who tuned in. Yo, I'm going to go ahead and end it here. Salutations to the nations. God bless. Peace.
Angel Knot.